Alien's Fireteam Elite 2 seems to be a project born from a clear intent to correct course, which already gives off a more reassuring impression than a simple, more of the same. The impression is that Cold Iron Studios looked at the first game, understood what worked in co-op, and decided to expand the concept rather than just repeat the formula. The first notable aspect of its development is the amount of time the game spent circulating quietly before its official announcement. Age rating listings followed by project detail leaks suggest development had already been underway for a while, even without significant marketing. To me, this suggests a game being developed with considerable caution, almost as if the team wanted to avoid setting expectations too early. Another important detail is that the sequel appears closely tied to feedback from the first game. The released information points to structural changes, such as expanding squad size from 3 to 4 players and adjusting classes and abilities, demonstrating an effort to rethink cooperative design. I appreciate this kind of decision because it usually stems from a genuine assessment of what the community felt was missing, rather than empty hype. It is also interesting that development has taken a more systemic direction, featuring day-one crossplay and a greater focus on accommodating different player profiles. This typically indicates a studio trying to build something more sustainable, rather than just a cooperative campaign shooter. In my view, when a studio accounts for social and group infrastructure from the start, it is clearly aiming for a longer lifespan for the project. At the same time, one aspect raises some caution. The game went through a somewhat turbulent path between leaks, rumors, and official confirmation, which always suggests a development process that may have required significant internal adaptation. It is not necessarily a bad sign, but it shows production was not presented as a straight, fully controlled path. This background often occurs when a team is testing the best way to reposition a sequel. The developer's mention of new modes, including Horde, alongside a more flexible specialist system, also suggests they are not just expanding content, they are attempting to redefine the game's identity. In my view, this is the most compelling aspect of development, as Aliens pairs naturally with constant pressure, coordination, and chaos, making adjustments to these fundamentals logical. If these changes are implemented well, the sequel could finally feel more ambitious than the original. Overall, looking strictly at what the developer has shown so far, I would say Aliens Fireteam Elite 2 appears to be a project focused on maturity rather than total reinvention. It is as if the studio is taking a solid idea with room to grow and refining nearly everything around it. My reading is that development is being handled with greater confidence, but also with careful attention to avoiding the first game's shortcomings. The development conveys the sense of a team that finally understood that in this universe, shooting xenomorphs is not enough. The game must also better establish tension, cooperation, and the feeling of survival. So far, the trajectory shared by the team points directly in that direction. Based on what the developer has revealed so far, the gameplay follows a clear direction, taking the cooperative foundation of the first game and making it broader, more strategic, and more chaotic. I'm just going to cut the video real quick to give you a tip. If you haven't played the first Aliens Fireteam Elite yet, it's 11% off on Instant Gaming, which is our partner here on the channel. So if you were waiting for an opportunity to check out the first game before jumping into the second one, this might be a good time to get it. And remember that Instant Gaming is not a marketplace. You buy directly from the store. If you decide to buy it, if you could use my affiliate link in the description, I would really appreciate it. You don't pay anything extra and it still helps the channel a lot. Now let's get back to the video. I like this approach because xenomorph combat functions best when the game applies constant pressure to the group, forcing everyone to monitor corridors, flanks, and incoming enemy volume. The design does not seem aimed at turning the series into slow-paced horror, but rather into a cooperative survival shooter featuring moments of controlled panic. The addition of a fourth player could significantly shift pacing. With 4 Marines, the squad can cover more ground, protect objectives more effectively, and divide roles during hordes. However, it could also make combat feel less claustrophobic if encounters are not tuned properly. My initial impression is that Cold Iron Studios is attempting to counterbalance this with smarter enemies and new xenomorph variants capable of pressuring the group in different ways. If this variety genuinely requires movement and adaptation, rather than just increasing enemy counts, the cooperative dynamic could become much more engaging. The Specialist class is likely the most notable gameplay shift. The ability to mix primary and secondary abilities from other classes could create distinct combinations, particularly for players who enjoy building loadouts and testing specific squad roles. At the same time, this level of flexibility only succeeds with proper balancing, as certain combinations might end up so effective that traditional classes become redundant. Even so, as a concept, it represents a more interesting evolution than simply adding another fixed class. I also appreciated indications that classes will have more defined combat roles. Turrets, drones, support abilities, and varied weapon styles suggest that gameplay will not rely solely on aim and continuous firing. Ideally, the group will need to combine crowd control, direct damage, and defensive support to survive waves. My concern is that these tools might become automatic solutions for every encounter. But based on the material shown, the game seems to want players to make deliberate tactical decisions about resource usage. New xenomorphs could also be critical in preventing gameplay from becoming repetitive. The original Fireteam Elite relied on corridors, straightforward objectives, and large enemy groups, so simply adding more creatures to the screen would not refresh the experience. What I want to see is a tangible difference in how each variant is engaged. Some forcing the team to reposition, others isolating players, and others breaking defensive setups. If enemies exhibit behaviors that alter strategy, each mission could demand a distinct tactical approach. Horde mode aligns naturally with this formula, especially with rounds featuring progressively harder waves and better rewards. For this mode to hold up over time, there needs to be a clear risk-reward balance, continuing to fight for better rewards versus extracting before the team loses control. Dedicated maps could help provide arenas with defined routes, defensive points, and spaces that accommodate different team compositions. However, it remains to be seen whether the maps offer genuine tactical options or simply result in camping behind the same cover. Overall, the revealed gameplay suggests a sequel that seeks to be more flexible, though not necessarily revolutionary. I see potential in combining 4 players, a customizable specialist, new enemy types, and cross-class synergy, as these elements can make runs less predictable. Still, my outlook remains cautious. The game still leans heavily on an established formula, and the final outcome will depend on how it balances hordes, creates encounter variety, and ensures abilities carry real weight. Based on what has been shown, I would play it with friends, but I do not believe the novelty lies merely in the increased player count. The narrative appears to take place 5 years after the events of the first game. I appreciate this time jump because it suggests the sequel does not simply want to repeat the exact same crisis, but rather showcase a universe continuing to deal with the fallout of the xenomorph presence. Still, it remains unclear whether this intervening period will be actively explored by the characters or serve strictly as background context. The campaign opens with a distress call from Dr. Lily Pierce on planet LV-558, specifically at the store's Boone mining colony. This premise is familiar, yet very fitting for Alien: a mysterious transmission, an isolated outpost, and a team deployed to investigate a situation that has already spiraled out of control. Personally, I like this type of opening because it raises questions before revealing the threat. Setting the story on the store's Boone mining colony also feels like an appropriate choice. The franchise has always operated best when alien threats intersect with human interests, particularly the exploitation of remote locations for resources. My expectation is that the story will demonstrate the colony was compromised by corporate or administrative decisions that prioritized operational goals over human safety. Dr. Pierce's distress call is the narrative element that most catches my interest. It is not yet clear what she uncovered, why she needed to call for help, or whether she is withholding information from the Marines. I hope she serves as more than just an inciting incident and plays an active role in the unfolding mystery. In a well-crafted alien narrative, the person calling for aid almost always knows more than they are willing to share. The mission also does not appear to be a straightforward rescue. The released material suggests the Marines arrive on LV-558 and quickly realize they are fighting for survival. This shift can work well if the campaign depicts the operation unraveling gradually. Following an organized plan as it deteriorates into desperation is far more engaging than starting with everyone fully aware of the scale of the threat. The introduction of the United Systems could add a political dimension to the narrative. Humanity is apparently undergoing organizational restructuring, which could introduce friction between military forces, corporations, and governing bodies. However, based on what has been presented, it is difficult to tell whether this element will carry real narrative weight or remain purely background lore. I would like to see it affect the mission directly rather than existing solely to explain the campaign's setting. Overall, the story for Aliens Fireteam Elite 2 seems familiar, though not necessarily weak. An isolated colony, a distress signal, and underlying corporate secrecy are core elements of the franchise, so the final outcome will depend on character writing and how the revelations unfold. For now, I am more interested in finding out what happened on LV-558 and what was kept from the Marines than expecting a narrative that completely reinvents the Alien universe. Aliens Fireteam Elite 2 appears to deliver a competent visual upgrade, though not a revolutionary one. The initial impression is a more polished title, featuring improved lighting and environments that better convey the claustrophobic atmosphere of the Aliens universe. What stood out most to me was the use of shadows. Dark corridors, metallic reflections, and partially lit sectors create a more menacing environment, particularly when xenomorphs dart across the background. The darkness does not appear to be used simply to obscure asset detail. In the trailers, it actively builds tension. The xenomorph models also appear visually refined. The exoskeleton textures, glossy surface sheen, and motion profiles give them a more aggressive, organic presentation. It remains to be seen whether this visual quality holds up during combat sequences with dozens of enemies on screen, but in the footage shown, they look more distinct and threatening than simple horde assets running in groups. Environmental variety is another notable element. The game continues to feature industrial corridors, abandoned facilities, and derelict zones characteristic of the franchise, but there appears to be greater contrast between areas. Despite a color palette dominated by grays, blacks, and metallic tones, deliberate accent lighting helps prevent environments from looking visually uniform. In my view, the Marines and synthetic units have also received more refined modeling. Armor sets show more distinct layering, wear, and technical details, while Weyland-Yutani synthetic combatants add a different silhouette to encounters. This visual contrast between military gear, androids, and xenomorphs helps maintain combat readability. At the same time, there are signs that the title is not aiming to compete with the most visually demanding current-generation releases. Certain animations appear utilitarian, facial models lack fine detail, and some environmental geometry still feels somewhat rigid. This is not necessarily an issue, as the visual identity of Aliens relies more on atmosphere, dynamic lighting, and industrial materials than raw graphical fidelity. Aliens, Fireteam Elite 2 looks visually more cohesive, dark, and atmospheric than its predecessor. It does not give the impression of a technical showcase, but rather a sequel with a clearer understanding of how to use lighting, shadow, metallic surfaces, and creature designs to build tension. If this visual baseline is maintained throughout full matches, the presentation could end up being one of the game's stronger assets. The game appears to be targeting more stable and consistent performance, though technical details remain insufficient to confirm how it will run at launch. While the developer has showcased visual refinements and larger-scale combat, concrete details regarding target resolutions, frame rates, and graphical presets for PC and console versions have not yet been detailed. The expansion to 4 players warrants some caution. Additional player models, higher on-screen xenomorph counts, acid pools, gunfire, and explosive visual effects can place heavy demands on hardware, particularly during peak horde sequences. The development team noted that encounter spaces and incoming damage have been expanded, which indicates higher intensity, but also makes visual stability critical. At the same time, targeting only PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series may work in its favor. Without the constraints of previous generation hardware, Cold Iron Studios has more room to implement larger environments, detailed lighting, and higher enemy density without making severe technical compromises. Still, this alone does not ensure stable performance, as co-op shooters with high entity counts frequently experience frame rate dips even on capable hardware. My main technical question lies in how the game performs during heavy action spikes. Standard traversal and small skirmishes might run smoothly, but the real test will be higher-tier horde mode waves and encounters with aggressive enemy groupings. With smarter AI behaviors, 4 players, and denser combat, unoptimized assets could easily trigger frame rate drops. Cross-play stability is another crucial factor. While cross-platform support is convenient, especially for a co-op title, overall performance also depends on network stability. Latency, desync, and disconnects can severely disrupt gameplay. Full cross-play support has been confirmed, but detailed information regarding server infrastructure and netcode has not yet been outlined. Visually, the footage suggests an iterative improvement rather than an engine overhaul. This could benefit performance, as the game does not appear to be pushing hyper-demanding visual targets. The technical priority seems focused on maintaining high on-screen enemy counts, fluid gunplay, and proper atmospheric lighting rather than advanced rendering techniques. For now, Aliens Fireteam Elite 2 shows technical potential, but remains subject to real-world testing. PC should offer the most flexibility, assuming robust graphical settings, while consoles would ideally feature a dedicated 60 frames per second performance mode at launch. Until technical specifications, extended test footage, or real-time gameplay across various scenarios are shown, a cautious outlook on performance remains warranted. Aliens Fireteam Elite 2 presents an interesting launch proposition, though the buying decision depends heavily on player preferences. The sequel retains its focus on cooperative missions, expands squad capacity to 4 players, and introduces new progression mechanics. These additions represent clear iterations over the previous entry, though it is too early to determine whether the content loop will sustain long-term engagement. The core appeal remains centered on the group experience. 4-player coordination allows squads more flexibility to balance roles and manage xenomorph swarms. For players with an established group, a launch purchase makes practical sense, as much of the game's value lies in cooperative progression and exploring classes, weaponry, and mission layouts together. Full cross-play support across PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series should also help sustain matchmaking pools. In a title built entirely around co-op, unified matchmaking across platforms is critical for lobby health. However, monitoring initial server stability and matchmaking performance during launch week remains advisable. Customization stands out as one of the more developed features. The game includes 5 base classes alongside a specialist class that allows players to combine abilities from leveled classes. This system will likely appeal to players who enjoy build crafting, optimizing loadouts, and refining mission strategies. Its ultimate success, however, will depend on build diversity and balance across combinations. Caution is advised for those seeking traditional survival horror, a narrative-driven campaign, or a dedicated solo experience. The material shown confirms the focus remains firmly on cooperative action, high enemy volume, and mission replay progression. While the atmosphere respects the Alien universe, the core loop is that of a tactical survival shooter rather than a slow-paced horror title. The $49.99 launch price point is also a relevant factor, sitting below the standard price tier for major releases and lowering the barrier to entry for coordinated groups. Even so, evaluating campaign length, horde mode depth, performance optimization, and total launch content remains sensible before considering it an essential purchase. Overall, a launch purchase is worth considering for fans of Aliens and cooperative shooters who already have a squad ready. For solo players, those wary of repetitive gameplay loops, or those looking for a story-heavy horror title, waiting for post-launch reviews or a sale is the more practical route. It looks like a solid project, but the final value will largely depend on how you plan to play it.